With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a fundamental difference between raising serious concerns over editorial failings and members of this House launching a sustained attack on the institution itself. Because the BBC is not just a broadcaster, it is a national institution that belongs to us all. Every day it tells the story of who we are, the people, places and communities that make up life across the UK. It projects British values, creativity and integrity to the world. It underpins our creative industries, has a footprint in our nations and regions that is unmatched by any other, and it is by far the most widely used and trusted source of news in the United Kingdom. As we write the next chapter of an institution that has stood at the centre of British public life for a century, our overarching goal is simple: to ensure the BBC can renew its mission for the modern age and continue to inform, educate and entertain, not just for the coming decade, but well into the next century.
The BBC is in a sorry mess, and sadly one of its own making, that has resulted in the resignations of the Director General and the CEO of News. These recent leadership changes are a response to the growing number of examples of bias in the BBC, one of which has resulted in a potential $1 billion lawsuit. This is why the Leader of the Opposition has said the BBC needs to change and needs saving from itself. Otherwise, we may all pay the price in reputational damage and in our pockets as licence fee payers. We all want the BBC to succeed, to be the best possible version of itself, but that requires institutional change and far more than a few moves at the top. But let me first acknowledge, Madam Deputy Speaker, some of the many good things that the BBC does well in delivering on its principles to inform, educate and entertain, from Strictly and Traitors to world-class natural history programming, sport and local radio, and coverage of major national events, including, of course, the recent remembrance services and events. So I'm glad that the BBC chair has admitted an error of judgment relating to the Panorama programme on Donald Trump, which involved editing of his speech to give the impression that he said something that he did not say. The BBC now faces a hefty lawsuit, and we do not want to see the taxpayer, the licence fee payer, or the rest of the BBC suffer because of the poor judgment of Panorama programme makers who seem unable to distinguish opinion from impartial journalism, who clearly all thought the same. And that's precisely the problem. It's remarkable that in every area of their operations, the BBC seeks inclusivity and diversity other than in thought, other than in political thinking. Does she agree that the BBC would do well to apologise to the British public too? Does she also agree we need a root and branch review of the BBC's adherence to impartiality, particularly as it relates to news and current affairs, and that we need more than apologies and resignations at the top, but clear actions on complaints processing, on governance, on oversight and on compliance to ensure that the BBC sticks to its charter obligations on impartiality and that it rigidly and consistently abides by its own editorial guidelines? The Minister did mention the next steps in the BBC Charter review, but we would appreciate more details on timelines as soon as possible.
Whatever the case with Donald Trump, who has actually said far worse than the wrongly edited clip showed, and it is a wrongly edited clip, the only ones rubbing their hands in glee right now during this whole debacle is those that do not want a free press. Those politicians who have deep pockets lined by goodness knows who. Those politicians that cosplay being journalists on RT and GB News, spreading division and hatred. I hope that all of us in this House would agree with the principle of keeping our public broadcaster free from political interference. So does the Secretary of State agree that it's time to review the influence of former Conservative spin doctor Robbie Gibb on the BBC's board?
Secretary of State.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question? In relation to the board, she will be aware that the Charter sets a strict legal threshold that must be met before dismissal of a board member, and so I am unable to pursue the course of action that she suggests. of course, the BBC is independent of government. It's essential that they're given the space to be able to get on with this process. But we have been working very closely with the BBC chairman at his request in order to make sure that the BBC can continue to thrive. I think it really does undermine trust and confidence in the BBC, because when it takes some time, if there's not a proper explanation as to why it has taken some time, it leads people to believe that there is a complacency at the top of the organisation. I think that's something that the chairman has heard loud and clear and has taken on board as part of the learning from this episode. And I also agree with him that, as somebody who has shared some of my frustrations with the BBC leadership and some of the failings that have happened over the last 16 months with this House, that the reason that I and others have been frustrated is because the BBC holds such an important place in our national life and has to command the trust of the whole public.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think we can all hear the frustration of the